Leadership Award from Seattle Times, and also get invited to Congress make testimony. So let's welcome Ms. Nancy Sclater.
Thank you, Sheree, for your kind introduction. It's wonderful to be here tonight, and I welcome you all to the wonderful city of Seattle. It's truly a special place, and I hope that you enjoy your time and can take advantage of many of the things that we have to offer in this part of the world. I bet that many of you have shared that experience of the proverbial fork in the road, where a new path comes before you, a journey that you couldn't have imagined in your wildest dreams. 7 years ago, I started on one of those journeys, leading me to some exotic places in the world, far more exotic than I could have ever imagined, and experiencing opportunities that I didn't even know were possible. So tonight I'm going to tell you a little bit about my personal journey and some of the lessons that we learned along the way, and how these lessons can be adapted to create a sustainable global impact, and how you can convert your passions into a reality. And then hopefully we'll have time for questions and answers. As Sheree mentioned, I was very fortunate to be the centennial president of Seattle Rotary. Seattle Rotary is the largest Rotary club in the world, where 700 of your closest friends meet for lunch every week. In planning for our centennial, I thought it would be a good idea to have a second century project, a goal to focus our work for the next 100 years. It would be based on what we'd learned in our other projects and require the ingenuity of our members, using the accumulated professional skills and combining them to complement all of the expertise available. It also was a project that would require tenacity, a project that might take decades to complete, nothing that could be accomplished in a simple, quick fix. Now, Rotary is really a unique organization, and just out of curiosity, how many Rotarians do we have in the room tonight? Very good. Well, I hope by the end of the evening, you're all members. So a little bit about Rotary. The organization is 110 years old. It started with a small group of businessmen in Chicago. The original purpose was to support each other's business. If you were a banker, you would hope that the other members would use your bank or buy insurance from the insurance broker. But when it came to Seattle, we were the fourth club to join Rotary International. Our local group decided that the best way to promote your business was to do community service, to be seen in your community doing good works, and then naturally your business would benefit from that. And it was this group in Seattle that also coined the motto, service above self, which is the mantra for Rotary International. Today, there are 30,000 Rotary clubs around the world and 1.2 Rotary members. Seattle Rotary was also the first club to cross international borders. In 1919, we chartered a club in Shanghai and in Manila. Think for a minute of what was going on in the world in 1919 and the foresight of those who chartered this club. It's an example of how Rotary can transcend politics, government, and even wars. We focus on the needs of people, and we work to solve problems of the common person to improve the human condition. Polio eradication is an example. I bet a lot in this room remember and fear polio. I remember as a girl, summers were not fun. My mother was a nurse, so every time we had a cold, she knew it was polio. But for 25 years, Rotarians have traveled to the remote parts of the world to work where polio is endemic. Working side by side with local Rotarians, sometimes in really very rural parts of the world, millions of young children have been vaccinated. The local partnerships are what is really critical. Imagine if I were going into a rural village in Africa and said, "Oh, let me have your baby. I'd like to give your baby some medicine." They would never trust me, nor would I trust anyone coming that I didn't know into my world and suggesting few drops of medicine. But with the partnership of the local Rotary groups around the world, we were able to create tremendous results. In 1979, polio was endemic in 125 countries in 5 continents, paralyzing 350,000 children every year. That's 1,000 children a day. Today, there are only 2 countries where polio even exists: Afghanistan and Pakistan. These are the last few inches of a very long road to eradicate polio. It will happen, and it will be a great day for the world. Remembering the accomplishments and the goals of polio, I wondered what our Second Century project should be. We're fortunate in Seattle Rotary because both the Bills Gates are members of our club. So I decided I'd send Bill an email. And you're all in technology, but it's kind of amazing to be able to sit at your computer and to write an email to Bill Gates. I wrote an email, explained what I thought was important and what we should be looking for. I checked my grammar and punctuation and made sure I spelled everything right. And then I pressed the send button. Again, I marveled at how technology has really changed our communication patterns. I was still sitting at my computer when the flash came on, "You have mail." And it was a reply from Bill Gates. "What are you doing tomorrow at 10? So at 10 o'clock, I walked into his office at the Gates Foundation, and he said one word: malaria. I said, "Malaria?" And he said, "Yes, we need to eradicate malaria. We can build on the infrastructure that was established through Rotary's work in polio and help organize all of the other humanitarian efforts, the NGOs, the civil society organizations, churches, all those who are dedicated to doing good." But it's no small task to eradicate malaria, a disease that has had the greatest impact on human history. For over 500,000 years, malaria has dominated civilization. Symptoms have been described in medieval Chinese writings as early as 2700 BC. Wars have been won and lost because of the effect of malaria on soldiers, and many famous people have succumbed to the disease. Alexander the Great, King Tut, and even George Washington. The disease has massive impact. Today, there are 500,000 deaths annually. It's the world's most prolific killer. It focuses on the vulnerable, the elderly, the sick, pregnant women, and children under the age of 5. 2 out of 5 children in sub-Saharan Africa will die before they reach the age of 5 from malaria. There are 250 million cases annually. The amount of suffering is impossible to imagine, as well as the economic loss and the productivity. Malaria is a disease that's very difficult to conquer. Pathologically, it is transmitted from person to person by a mosquito. The mosquito bites a person who is infected with the parasite, and actually it's a female mosquito, as she takes her blood meal, she also takes with her that parasite. And so the next person she bites, she deposits the parasite in his blood or her blood, and the cycle continues. The parasite also has an amazing ability to adapt, which makes it very difficult to control. It can adapt in just a few generations to environments, to drugs, so it's very, very difficult to control. It's really a moving target. So now that you know all about malaria, let's go back to my meeting with Bill Gates. As I'm leaving his office, he said, "Oh, Nancy, you can't just preach about malaria. You can't just talk about it. You need to go and see how it really works, the devastating effects, what it does to people around the world." So I was off to Zambia. It was never on my bucket list, I might let you know that, but I was there in a matter of days. I met with the 7 Rotary clubs in Lusaka, the capital city of Zambia. I went with them to view their many projects. They had no malaria projects, but they had built schools. They had provide food for orphans. Just amazing work. There was absolutely no shortage of need. These local business leaders recognized the huge burden that malaria places in their community. But they needed partners. They needed help to conquer the disease. I attended a meeting of all of the local Rotary members with a few people from the United States who, I must admit, were very skeptical. Finally, at the end of the meeting, when we had been working on establishing a project, my skeptical friend said, "Well, I just don't know how, this group of 30 people, how are you going to do this? This is a massive problem. I mean, we need someone who has a connection to print flyers to start publicizing this event." A hand went up. "Sir, I'm a printer. I'll print anything you want." "Oh, okay." "Well, we need to publicize it on the media. We need to have it in radio and television." Another hand went up. "I own 3 radio stations and 2 TV stations. I would be happy to do public service announcements." And the final question came, "Well, we need to coordinate with the government. We need to make sure we're working on the same page as the government." A hand went up again. "Sir, I am the Minister of Health, and you have my support, the government's support, so let's get to work." And that we did. We developed our first small project in Lusaka. The United States clubs would fund most of the cost, but we would also supply members to augment the work by being able to increase the number of volunteers. We worked on educating on the symptoms of malaria and distributed rapid testing kits to health workers so that they would be able to diagnose appropriately and take care of the sick. Our first project was successful, albeit it was very small. The second year we came back with 5 projects in different regions of Zambia. 20 Rotarians joined, and there were hundreds of Africans who met us. I will never forget, as we started to walk to the health camp, suddenly we heard music, and there was a band marching toward the health camp. They surrounded us, and they marched us into the camp with a full band. The enthusiasm and appreciation of what we were partnering and doing still gives me goosebumps. It was very powerful. Our work continues to grow. We now have 50 clubs in the United States supporting projects in Zambia, Tanzania, and Uganda. We have 15 very large regional projects. We know that we have treated over 280,000 people, and have prevented more than 5,000 certain deaths. Those are all global health statistics. The Rotary clubs have raised $1.23 million to augment the services provided. So what have we learned? Local leadership is essential. Local Rotarians need to be the leaders, and we need to support them. It's their community. They know it best. They are invested in the community, and they provide great assurance that the work will not only be maintained, it will be sustained. The second lesson was to work closely with national and regional governments. Support their programs, don't reinvent them. Help them be more successful and larger. Be strategic and have a big plan. You may start very small, but be strategic and know where you're going and how you're going to get there. And make sure you have a strong base of local support. Make your project scalable. Start small, and with each succeeding project, improve. Make sure that it is flexible to adapt to different environments. And finally, join with others. It's most important that the job get done, not who gets credit. When we started, multiple organizations, for example, say a church in Bakersfield, California, might have collected money, raised enough money to distribute 100 bed nets. That is great work, but imagine if that were leveraged with a much larger group. We could be working together to capture the economies of scale. We could tackle transportation costs and be able to work in a much larger and effective geographic area. In comparing Rotary's polio work and malaria work, technology has been the big game changer. We were able to move quickly because of this technology. International meetings are conducted in Skype. Email has replaced faxes or even regular post office mail when polio first began. We're able to monitor where supplies have been delivered, where diseases are current, all through cell phone technology. Technology offers unbelievable opportunities and is critical to get us to move quickly in eradicating malaria. We have to move faster than the parasite can adapt. And this is just the beginning. After working in malaria for 3 years, I received an email from a Rotarian in Uganda. He was aware of my work in blood banking and in blood products. And he said, well, you've been doing all this work in malaria, so why don't you help us make blood transfusions in Africa safe? So the whole process started again. Another important venture with Rotary. We partner with BloodWorks, which is a local blood banking center here in Seattle and one of the largest in the country. We're partnering with BloodWorks colleagues around the world, and we are starting our project to make Africa's blood safe. We are planning to replicate it throughout Africa and in other parts of the world where blood products are not safe and create a real problem. So the work is very exciting, and the statistics validate that what we're doing truly makes a difference. But what is also personally gratifying are the relationships you make while you're working side by side. These friendships scan thousands of miles, and it's an opportunity to learn different cultures and religions, and in the end, making the world a much better and safer place. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Yes?
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. It's outstanding the work that you've done here. I didn't know that Seattle was the largest Rotary club, and it seems to have gained a very large groundswell of support and inertia in solving and eradicating a very serious global problem. With a seemingly endless supply of financial resources and a very large army of boots on the ground workers, it seems like you'd be able to solve any problem. But I imagine there's the last few meters of delivery of the service that doesn't quite get you to, absolute zero. What are some of the challenges that remain from the human perspective, human capacity perspective, or any of the other issues that you see that are still present, and how technology might be able to bridge that last few gaps that you might be encountering?
That's really an important question. We're using as our example the eradication of smallpox. And that started out in a similar way. It's not parasite, but it's an infectious disease. And getting it into smaller and smaller areas. And I'm sorry. I'll repeat the question. So the last few meters, how do you get there? It's always a problem. We are in the last few meters with polio, and we should have eradicated polio by now. But what happens is there are migrations of people in Africa who then go into an area where the vaccine has not been, is not as current. So it will then sprout up again. But we're able, through technology, to track exactly where they are, to track the DNA of the outbreak, and to be able to know how to control it and capture it completely. Technology is going to be what will win this war. And to be able to tap into the use of cell phones and to track where things are immediately, those kinds of devices will be really important. But you're absolutely right, the last little bit is the toughest, and yet it's not eradicated when there's still a few meters to go. Yeah, we will get there. We have to get there. It's too important. You're welcome. Are there other questions? Yes?
So you compared it to the eradication of polio, something we had a vaccine for.
Right.
Administer that vaccine. How do you see that working for malaria, which as far as I know there is no vaccine for? What is your method for eradicating?
Okay. Okay, the question is the difference between polio, which is a disease that can be vaccinated against, and malaria, for which we have no vaccine. We're probably 10 years off in getting a vaccine, and as I mentioned, the mosquito is able to change so rapidly that, we hope that vaccine will still work. We did a project a few years ago. Well, we started out with bed nets because that was, known. But that's really just a temporary fix, and we need to do more. Bed nets wear out, they're not totally effective. So we did a project about 3 years ago where we went into a very remote village in Uganda. And Uganda has the highest incidence of malaria in the world. It's just amazingly endemic. And so we went into this rural area and treated everyone, the village of about 20,000 people, as if they had the parasite. They probably did. It is probably very realistic that they did. So we presumptively treated everyone with 2 medications to wipe out the parasite in their blood. there was no malaria for 9 months because the mosquitoes were still biting, but they weren't able to go from one to the other and transmit it. We're going to be doing a much larger scale project to test it even further. What really could happen is that we might have an Eradicate Malaria Day in Africa where everyone, lots of soldiers on the ground go in and say, okay, for the next 2 days you're taking these 2 pills, and then get the burden down low enough that we could do the SWAT handling the way smallpox was eradicated. Yes?
So there's a number of us who are involved in the IEEE, a large organization. So my question is, are there some things you would think that IEEE could do Rotary on some of these issues you're working on?
They're just endless possibilities. They monitor. Oh, yep, thank you. I could hear you perfectly, sorry. So asking how we could partner and use our resources. Technology, as I said, is going to be the game changer. And we need to validate not only our statistics, but we need to be able to go into very remote places and be able to treat and care for people. So being sure that we have medicines and vaccines that are refrigerated when there is no electricity is always a problem. To be able to take care of some of the medical needs is really amazing. When I went to Zambia in my first trip, I went to an obstetrical hospital. And this was something that the Rotary Club had built, and they were very, very proud of it, and saved many lives. But as I looked around, there were no antibiotics. There was no ability to give blood transfusions. There were no many of the very difficult traditional things that go along with childbirth. And I remember it was a very humbling moment for me, because I stood there realizing that I would have died twice in childbirth if, by the grace of God, I wasn't born in the United States, but I was born in a rural village in Zambia. And so to get the medical technology that we know today, I don't think very many people in the United States would tolerate the fact that 1, 2, and 5 children under the age of 5 die of malaria by the time they reach 5. I have 5 grandchildren. There's no way I would lose 2. So we have to communicate and use the technology that you have to further get supplies and instrumentation there. The medical instrumentation would be huge. Ultrasounds, handheld ultrasounds, those kinds of things are diagnostic tools would be great. Yes?
So with your experience in malaria specifically, where do you see the most significant gap in terms of technology? Are there specific areas where you would say, man, I really wish there was technology that would help this, or specific things that you think the technology would really help?
What technologies would be most beneficial? I think, again, it's the medical technology of being able to have portable, reliable technology to monitor health status of people, and be it an ultrasound, blood pressure, diabetes, all of those things that we're on a real lip of being able to have all of those types of things in very small devices. We have them in some parts of our country where you can go into a little kiosk and have all of your medical tests done. It would be great to be able to have something like that. I think it would bolster the economy tremendously in Africa that is constantly battling with disease. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's on. Yeah. Thank you very much, Nancy. In addition to Nancy talk about all the disease, Rotary have whole suite of different type of humanitarian technologies, humanitarian projects, from education to go to help out in different villages to do various different energy and all kinds of wonderful things. And it's opened up to us an infinite possibility to work together. It's my distinguished pleasure to welcome Dr. William Stefanov. He is leading scientist at the NASA International Space Station. He oversees a group of scientists and lead them for remote sensing to detect the Earth's movement and remote sensing data for collecting for catastrophic event. He also trained international scientists about how to work on those data. And he also wrote many scientific papers and published many books. He's a very well respected scientist, and also he trained astronauts. And so teach them how to do things in space station. So let's welcome Dr. William Stefanov.
Thank you very much, Sherry. And done. The geologist. Okay, how's that? Good, good, okay, great. So, what I'll talk about here first is give you a little background on the International Space Station, why we have one. Then I'll talk some about the various remote sensing instruments that we have on the ISS right now and planned for the future. And then I'll talk more about the benefits that we get from ISS. I'm going to focus primarily on collecting data for disaster response, but I'll also talk a little bit about some of the other areas that benefits from the space station are being made available to people around the world right now. So first of all, why do we have a space station in the first place? It's because humans are explorers. It's a natural trait of ours to explore, whether that's explore geographically, explore intellectually, or just exploring personally. And that exploration over history has typically taken the form initially of technology, finding new resources, developing new technologies, new kinds of sailing ships. And science has come along later, but science does come along. And the story of the space station is a very similar exercise. It started off as a big technological demonstration. We finished completing construction of the International Space Station in 2011. And now we've moved into the realm of where we're actually using it. The construction is done. We're now focusing on the science and the engineering knowledge that we can get from the ISS. And part of that, the international part, I think resonates very well with this conference. This is the Global Humanitarian Technology Conference, and the ISS is an international space station where a number of many nations, a small subset of partner nations, but many other nations working together to use this technological asset that we've created to derive benefits, both for themselves, but also for the global community in general. And this is something that I think the ISS is a really good demonstration of. It's how humans around the world can work together to a common good. I just put this up as one of the most recent things that we're doing on the space station. You may have heard about it. It's the one-year mission. This is specifically devoted to getting more information to enable us to go to other planets or other bodies in the solar system, Mars being our target right now. And there's some interesting little factoids here. Probably the ones that are of most interest to this group right off the bat are the third ones down from the top. Organic waste recycling. I know there's been a track in this conference that has specifically talked about that. We're developing technologies and using technologies to recycle wastewater for use in long-duration missions. And some of that technology has been translated back onto on-the-ground applications here on Earth. I'll show an example of that later on in the talk. But this is one of the things that we try to do. We develop these technologies for space applications, but quite frequently those technologies can be translated back onto the Earth's surface for use in other applications. So, some more of the background info. 95 countries around the world have participated in ISS utilization. Through March 2015, that number is the same today. This is a little bit of an older chart. But almost every country in every hemisphere, the biggest gaps we have in participation on ISS research are in Africa and the Middle East. And there are various reasons for that. But we are actively pursuing collaborations in those areas to get people from those countries to become involved in ISS research as well. At the bottom you see the list of the long-standing partner countries. And you see they cover quite a range of areas around the world too, different cultures, different countries. So you might ask, so how do I do something with the International Space Station? And there's a number of routes you can go. This graph shows the areas that the ISS program office at Johnson Space Center, this is the group that oversees these interactions. You see on the blue quadrant, NASA research. This is sort of the primary route. This is where you have typical grants given to scientists to do research on the station through a number of the different directorates that ISS has, that NASA has. You see in the light green slice there, that's the ISS National Laboratory. This is administered by the Center for Advancement of Science and Space, and this is a organization that was specifically designed to let basically people who weren't NASA get access to the International Space Station. This is where people like U.S. commercial sector, private sector entities, nonprofit organizations, other U.S. government agencies, IEEE investigators. This is where you could apply to get grant money to do experiments on the space station, build sensors to put on the space station. This is the route you would go. The only caveat here is that it is the U.S. National Laboratory, so you have to be a U.S.-based entity to access the space station through this route. That doesn't exclude international participation. It just means that you have to have a PI, principal investigator, who's from a U.S. institution, and that can be academia or agencies or what have you. The bottom slice there, the green slice, is the international partners. This is the Canadian Space Agency, the Japanese Aerospace Agency, European Space Agency, and the Italian Space Agency. We all work together to conduct experiments. We have barter arrangements, so we do something for JAXA, then we can access some of their resources in exchange for some of our crew time or vice versa. All the international partners also have various routes by which you can put experiments or do work on the space station. They have their own grant mechanisms. And for our international participants here, I heartily encourage you to investigate those options if you're interested in doing something on the ISS. You might also note off to the right, or my right, yes, you're right too, there's sort of a shadow circle there where Roscosmos, our Russian partner, sits. And that's because Russia pretty much runs their part of the space station as a separate entity from the rest of us. We do collaborate with each other, but they have very different processes from what we do. But we're working on improving that collaboration. In fact, I'm working with several Russian atmospheric scientists to get access to one of our sensors currently on board, the ISS RapidScat, which I'll talk about in a moment. So, what are we doing on the ISS today? Here you see a breakdown of the number of different areas in which we're conducting research. And again, this talk is going to focus primarily on U.S. Activities, not so much on the international partners. But you see we have biology, biotechnology, human research, physical sciences, tech demos, earth science, astrophysics, and education, a pretty broad palette of research going on the ISS. I'm going to focus most of my comments on earth science. So, let's dive into that part of the talk. Remote sensing of Earth, why ISS? Sure many of you know there's a large number of remote sensing assets currently in orbit around the Earth, satellites, unmanned satellites. Well, most of those satellites are in polar orbits. They're designed to cover the entire surface of the Earth and go over each spot on a given spot on the Earth at about the same time of day when they have a repeat cycle. And this is a very useful way to set up an orbit because it allows you to collect a very regular set of data. And probably the best example of this is the Landsat series of satellites that have been collecting data since 1972. That's very, very regular data collection. It's very easy to work with from a scientific standpoint, but it only gets you over the same spot on the Earth about every 2 weeks or so. So if you're thinking about dynamic events or disaster events, that satellite may not be in the right spot to actually collect data when the event is happening. The ISS, on the other hand, is in what we call an inclined equatorial orbit, and that's what graphics saw that describe out. The ISS orbit basically goes from 52 north to 52 south latitude. That covers a good part of the Earth's surface. We'll see a few numbers in a minute. But it's not sun synchronous, so that means the ISS can pass over different spots of the Earth at different times of day or night. And this provides the opportunity to collect what is in many ways a fundamentally different data set than the traditional polar orbiting satellites have collected. It also allows the ISS to be, in many cases, in the right place at the right time to collect data for an evolving natural disaster. The other thing that is significant about the ISS is, of course, there are humans on board of it. This makes it a very significant, different platform than all of the other remote sensing assets that are currently in orbit. The fact that we have humans on board gives you an additional capability to where you can have an astronaut look out the window and say, wow, look, there's a volcano erupting down there that people may not have known about. And this is an actual true story. During ISS Increment 13, Jeff Williams, one of the astronauts on board, literally did just that. They were flying over the Aleutian Island chain. He looked out the window, saw a massive eruption beginning. They passed over it just as the eruption was starting. And he literally picked up a phone, and really is a phone, and called the U.S. Geological Survey in Anchorage and said, hey, I'm in the ISS and I see a volcano erupting. Do you guys know about it? And at first he had to convince them that he was in fact an astronaut calling them from the ISS. But it turned out that it was Cleveland volcano which was erupting, and the eruption was powerful enough to put up ash particles into about the 30,000 foot range, which is where airlines fly over. And as many of you probably know, that's a significant hazard for airliners flying at that altitude. If there's a volcanic eruption going on in that part of the world, there's a lot of flight lines that pass over that. And if you get volcanic ash in aircraft engines, it can cause them to fail. And of course, you know what happens after the airline engine fails. So this is an example of where, sort of a good example of serendipity. The serendipitous location of humans on board enabled that data to be collected just as the event was happening. And of course, that's not the only data collection set we have on the ISS. We have a number of other sensors as well. So some more fun facts. The reason the ISS has become a very attractive platform for doing remote sensing work is it's a very powerful platform. It has very powerful data connections, and it has a number of different mounting points that you can put sensors on board. As I said, it covers a pretty good range of the Earth's surface, basically 85% of the Earth's surface, which includes 95% of the world's populated surface. So we're covering all the areas of great interest for human population. said number of external sites, and we've talked about everything else here. It's a good test bed area, specifically for those in the audience who might be instrument developers or interested in remote sensing yourselves. It's an excellent platform to test new sensor technologies because you can concentrate on designing the sensor. You don't have to build a spacecraft to put the sensor on, and that's one of the big advantages. You build the sensor, typically NASA will fly it up there for you and subsidize the cost, so you can concentrate purely on building the sensor and doing the science with it. So, as I said, I'm a geologist, so these are a lot of the areas that we can use data from the ISS for. I won't go into each and every one. We're going to focus primarily on the hazard assessment one, but you can see it's useful for a variety of also just basic research as well as applied research. So this is a little graphic that shows you a little smattering of earth science instruments, and because this is a NASA presentation, you'll see there are tons of acronyms all over the place. I'll define some of them as we go along, but I'll point out some of the mounting points here. These things that you see marked as ELC, the external logistics carriers, these are platforms which are mounted on the outside of the station truss, and so you get both nadir, which is viewing directly down at the Earth, and zenith, viewing up away from the Earth, mounting points for sensors. You have two exposed facilities on modules on the ISS. You have the Japanese experiment module exposed facility, the GEM-EF, and the Columbus exposed facility. Columbus is the ESA, the European Space Agency module that was contributed to the space station. And those both have what we call back porches, where you can mount sensors looking either zenith up away from the Earth or nadir down on the Earth's surface. There's also interior location points for the ISS in the short sleeve environment. That's in the facility we call the WRF, the Window Observational Research Facility. There is currently a camera in there that's being used by the IMAX Corporation to film a movie. They're just about to shuttle out, and so we're thinking now about what new sensors we can put in. You see right here we have iServe. I'll talk about that sensor in a minute. The meteor sensor is one that's designed to track meteors entering the Earth's atmosphere and measure how that material evolves as it goes through the atmosphere, what the gas compositions are evolved from those meteors, so they can back out what bodies in the solar system they came from. CEO's, the Crew Earth Observations Experiment. This is the astronauts taking pictures out the windows with handheld cameras. This is actually the facility that my group at Johnson Space Center manages. And that's where the whole astronaut training bit comes in, because we teach the astronauts the basic science behind the types of targets that we want them to capture. We found that if the astronaut understands why we want them to take another picture of a volcano when they pass over it, they're much better at taking that data that we need, rather than just giving them a bald line on a task list that says, hey, take a picture of Pluto volcano. If they understand why we want them to do it, they're much better effective photographers. Some of these other sensors that we have planned for the future. EcoStress is a sensor system that's going to be looking at thermal data collected around the world, primarily to look at carbon cycling and water cycling on the Earth's surface. The JEDI LiDAR, that's the Global Ecosystem Dynamics Investigator, that is going to be mapping the Earth's vegetation canopy as it goes over and looking at carbon dynamics. And some of these other sensors, the HDEV is operating right now. That's the high definition Earth viewing sensor. That is a high definition camera system which points at various areas, 4 camera systems, one of which points down at the Earth. So that's a streaming, real-time streaming HD video feed, so you can actually see what the astronauts are looking out the window as they see it themselves. Let's move on. So just some examples of some of this data. This is some crew photography taken by the Crew Earth Observations Experiment of the Uppsala Glacier, and this is an example of how this data can be used to get at things like climate change types of research. Here you see an 11-year time series starting in 2002 and ending in 2013, where we were able to track the retreat of the glacier terminus as the regional temperature has gone up in that area. So this is in the Patagonia area of South America. And so you see that the glacier terminus has gone backwards about 4 kilometers over this 11-year period. And this is one of the things that we're tracking all around the world, both from the ISS, but also from a number of other satellites that NASA and other agencies have, looking at glacier retreat and glacial loss over time. The ISS Surveyor, the iServe camera, this is one of the camera systems that was specifically designed to go on the ISS for the express purpose of humanitarian benefits. This is associated with the SERVIR program, which is a joint NASA-USAID organization, which their whole mission is to use remotely sensed data to support developing countries. They collect data that is then distributed to various countries around the world through a variety of nodes. And they don't just give the data to the, well, they do give the data to the people, but part of their mission is also to train personnel in those countries and how to use that data and how to apply that data to whatever problems of interest are in that country. During the disaster management track, we had a very interesting conversation about this very topic, that it's one thing to provide data, but you also have to be cognizant of what the people that you're giving that data to, what their needs actually are. It's not just a matter of saying, here's the data you need to solve what we think are your problems. This program helps train the people in those countries to address their problems themselves. They're the ones who best understand what they need data to tackle. And that's what the SERVIR program does. iServe was their first experiment in designing a camera system specifically to collect data so that they could provide information to their users, their end users. And you see here a number of examples of some of the data they've collected for things like floods, landslides, various other data sets. Their sensor system was also very instrumental in disaster response. And I'll have a better example of that as we go along. A few more other instruments. The CATS instrument, these are two sensors that went up most recently on the ISS. The CATS is the Cloud Aerosol Transport System. This is a LiDAR system designed specifically to look at aerosols. And by characterizing the types of aerosols and how they transfer through the Earth's atmospheric system, we're getting a handle on how those aerosols are contributing to warming in the atmosphere and global warming as a consequence. This sensor system is also used for looking at volcanic eruptions so that we can understand how particulates and volcanic plumes evolve over time. So that has a direct hazard application as well. The Rapid Scat instrument is a radar instrument. This is a sea surface scatterometer collecting operational data for sea surface winds. So this sensor is not used only for basic research. It's actually an operational sensor feeding information into weather forecasting and storm tracking information systems. So just a brief slide to talk about some of the other sensors that are coming up. SAGE 3 is a sensor that's going to be looking at ozone creation and destruction processes in the upper atmosphere. EcoStress I've already talked about, JEDI I've already talked about. LIS is the lightning imager sensor. This is a sensor designed to look at top of atmosphere phenomena like sprites and elves and things of that nature, and backing forth the geophysical dynamics, how the Earth's atmosphere is responding to geophysical changes on the Earth's surface. So we're now at our benefits to humanity spot, and if we could dim the lights, since I've been throwing a lot of information at you, this is a nice little eye break for you. So sit back and enjoy the view from space as the ISS tracks across northern India at night. And the flashes you're seeing are thunderstorms. And this is the view they have every day at work. All right, I'll pop back to our regularly scheduled program. Okay, now we'll talk a little bit about some of the Earth benefits. What we've done in the ISS program is we've conceptually broken up the benefits from the ISS into 5 major areas: human health, Earth observation, innovation technology, global education, and economic development of space. I'm going to focus on Earth obs and disaster response, although I will have a couple of examples for some of the other ones too. So this is an iServe image of Calgary that was taken in 2013 following some heavy rainfall events and flooding of the Bow River that runs through Calgary. iServe, this image was taken in a set specifically to enable the response agencies in British Columbia to help map out areas of damage from the flooding and where they had best concentrate their resources for dealing with that. Those are the red areas, the areas most affected by flooding. But this is probably one of the best examples of direct use of ISS data for disaster response. The ISS is also involved in a larger organization that's known as the International Charter of Space and Major Disasters, also known more informally as the International Disaster Charter, or IDC. This is an international agreement by agencies around the world that have orbital assets, agencies that can collect Earth observation data. And the agreement is that if a country asks for it, if we can, we collect data for use in that country in responding to a natural hazard. And here you see the member agencies in the Americas and Europe and Asia. You might note that there's no NASA symbol under the Americas. What you see is the U.S. Geological Survey. NASA is not a direct participant in this. We work with the U.S. Geological Survey, which is the U.S. contact for the IDC. And so we have an arrangement for the ISS that works through my office, where our colleagues in the USGS inform us when a disaster activation has been submitted. We then coordinate with our partners to collect data and then feed it back to the USGS after we take a look at the data. And this is just a little flow chart that shows you exactly how we do that. This is specifically designed for use to notify the crew when we want them to take information. But as I said, the USGS tells us something has happened. A country has submitted an International Disaster Charter activation. We then send that notice out to the NASA ISS sensor teams, and we then provide, after that initial notification, a little data package that we call a data nugget that gives the crew and the sensor teams more detailed information about that International Disaster Charter activation, where to look, what the hazard is, what kind of features we're looking for them to capture data for. We then look at the ISS orbit track 24 hours in advance, so we can see what chances the crew or other sensors is going to have to actually see that area. What happens frequently, particularly for flooding events, is the storm that created the flooding tends to hang around. So you have an unfortunate situation where there's an area that's flooded, but it's completely cloud covered. So in that case, we typically will let the crew know that hazard event has occurred, but we may not give that to them as a specific target because there's no point. They're not going to see anything. But other sensors that might be able to penetrate that cloud cover, so we tell them as well. But in the event that, in fact, we do have a target opportunity, we give that to the crew, assuming they take information. They downlink that to us in a rapid process where we see it immediately. We then review it, QA, QC, to make sure that they actually did take the data that's of use. And we then send that to the U.S. Geological Survey. What they do with it is they then post it on their site for distribution to whatever country or countries requested the data. And the ISS became part of this asset group. Other NASA sensors have been part of this pretty much for many, many years before the ISS came along, or before the ISS became operational, let me say. But in May 2012, we joined this group of assets. And since then, we've now received 141 IDC activations. As soon as I finished this presentation, we got 2 new ones in. The latest one being a landslide in Guatemala. So that's 141. And we've collected data from the ISS for 37 of these events from various sensors. The ISAC there, that was the ISS agricultural camera. That was a former sensor that's no longer there. CEO, Core Earth Observations, handheld photography. HICO was the hyperspectral imager for the coastal ocean, also a sensor that is no longer operating, and then the iServe camera. So here's just an example of what one of those data nuggets looks like. You can see it has a lot of it's fairly dense information for the crew or other sensor teams. And this is where the data ends up. This is the USGS Hazards Data Distribution System. And this is an example of crew photography that was taken for an event in flooding in Russia. This is where people who requested the data will extract the data from. So again, NASA, we don't distribute the data ourselves, or at least for the ISS, we don't distribute that data ourselves. We let the USGS do that. So another benefit that's not purely hazard, this is a little bit more information on the RapidScat sensor. Again, we're looking at ocean vector winds and providing real-time operational weather forecasting and storm monitoring ability. What you see in the upper right-hand there is some of the data that's derived from this sensor. This is for the winter storm Juno that occurred earlier this year up in the Northeast. And you see this is what RapidScat measures. It measures both the direction and wind speed of the storm. And so this data is of great interest for people studying hurricanes as well, to kind of get a better handle on what the hurricane dynamics actually are. So at this point I've shown you a lot of different data sets, and you might be sitting out there asking, well, is there a place where I can look at all this data in an easily accessible format? I'm glad you asked, because we do in fact have such a tool. NASA has several very, very useful integrated data search tools for the unmanned orbital sensor system data sets that we have. Most of the ISS data is not in fact accessible through those systems. So what we have done at JSC is that we've designed our own system specifically for ISS data, and we call it the I4. This is the ISS integration. Oh damn! I knew I was going to forget this. Take my word for it. It's the ISS Instrument Integration Investigation Toolset. So what you see here is, of course, the Seattle area, Puget Sound, and the little yellow dots that you see there, those are all astronaut photographs taken of the area. The red dots, those lines are iServe data. The sort of purplish footprints, that's from a sensor called EarthCam, which is more of an educational sensor. It's also digital photography, but it's school children uploading areas of interest and a camera automatically taking images as it goes across. But all of this data you can search for through this portal, and you see the URL down there at the bottom. This is what we call a metadata search tool. So we're not actually duplicating these data sets. What this tool will do is will take you to wherever that data set lives, and then you can extract the data directly from that tool set, because we believe in not contributing to data bloat on the internet. So this is why we're going this way. So that's the remote sensing data, and now I'll kind of move us into the ending part of the talk, where I talk about some of the other benefits that are coming from the ISS. The first one I'll talk about here is dusty plasma in the health area. Dusty plasmas are, as the name suggests, ionized gases with small particulates in them. And what we've discovered through research on the ISS is that a very interesting property of these dusty plasmas is that they contribute to rapid wound growth. Rapid wound healing, not growth. No one would want that. It's been proven to be a very useful therapy for disinfecting wounds, promoting rapid regrowth, and is also showing some promise as perhaps a cancer treatment as well. I said I'm not a medical doctor, so I'll admit I don't really understand the biophysics of exactly how this works, but it's kind of unspeakably cool that it does. And this is something that we're developing as a technique that can be applied around the world to help areas that might be a very great use for some of the activities going on here in this group. The Regen ECLIS. So we love our acronyms. This is the Environmental Control Life Support System on the ISS. And this is part of the system that recycles wastewater and urine to distill it and turn it back into drinkable water. Part of that system, part of the resin that was used in that system, has been adapted for use on the Earth and has been actually deployed in several areas to provide potable water for people affected by natural disasters. This shot that you see here is from an area in Pakistan that was affected by an earthquake. And you see the system that was developed, the resin tubes, that allows potable water to be created without the use of power systems. So one of the things that we talked about as well in the disaster track was that, and I think earlier this morning, is that you have to have power, you have to have an infrastructure to make a lot of these technological solutions work. This is a solution that doesn't rely on a power infrastructure. It simply uses gravity. And then on the educational side, education is a major part of what goes on the ISS, training the next generation of scientists and engineers. And this is a shot of Canadian Space Agency astronaut Chris Hadfield with the Tomato Sphere project. This is 600,000 tomato seeds that were flown up on the ISS, basically exposed to microgravity, and then sent back to Earth and distributed amongst a network of schools for students to grow and do hands-on science to see if there was any difference between the tomatoes that were exposed to the space microgravity environment and just regular old tomato seeds that didn't have that experience. And so it's training them both in biology, but also in the scientific method. And then we have monoclonal antibodies. This is another medical therapy that's based on how our own immune systems work. This wasn't discovered on ISS, but the ISS has proved very useful for growing these protein crystals to investigate how these monoclonal antibody therapies work. Because in microgravity, we can develop much larger and much more perfectly formed protein crystals that we can then study using X-ray diffraction techniques to understand exactly how these proteins, how these structures cause binding of proteins to cells and vice versa. And so this is something that Merck is very involved in, to develop these kind of therapies that can then be used for people on the Earth's surface. So that's a smattering of some of the things that are coming from the ISS in terms of benefits for humanity. All these stories and more are collected in an attractive volume here that you can download for free from this URL, and I've been told that all of these presentations will be available. So don't try to write this down on the back of a napkin or anything. You'll be able to access it later. But this will include a lot of the stories that I've talked about, from remote sensing as well as any other areas of benefits to humanity. Other information resources that you can look at, we have, of course, the main ISS mission page. You can follow our tweets, ISS Research. There's a blog with all sorts of interesting stories from the ISS. And we also have a spot where you can see where the ISS is passing over your town. If you're more of a smartphone person, then you can have apps which can access a lot of this information, both for iOS and Android. And I will stop there. Thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. Yes, sir. Yes. The question, if I heard it correctly, is what's our connection with EarthCast? EarthCast it's a commercial venture that involves a number of partners. Actually, the primary partner at the moment for the ISS is the Russian side, Roscosmos. It's actually mounted on the Russian segment of the ISS. EarthCast is an imaging system which is intended to collect HD video, real-time streaming video, much like the HDIF system, at a much higher resolution. I believe it's about, they're aiming for 1 meter per pixel resolution. They also have a multispectral camera system, which is 4 meter per pixel resolution. And so far, the company has put out, I believe, 3 or 4 examples of the streaming video that they've collected from the system. I know Boston is one city. I think Rio de Janeiro is another one. And it's kind of incredible to look at. You can see individual cars moving along the highway. It's right now they're still working on some of their data transfer issues because it's a lot of data, and right now it has to kind of come through the same pipeline that all of the other data from the experiments comes down from the ISS. I didn't talk too much about supporting technologies on the ISS, but in addition to the sensors themselves, we're also investigating things like laser communication systems, ways to improve expand the pipeline so that we can, as we have more hyperspectral sensors, more large data volume sensors coming online, we'll be able to stream that data down in a very timely fashion. So I hope that answers your question. Yes. Okay, the question, it's a two-part question. First is how far in advance do we know where the ISS is going to be, and then can we change the path of the ISS in case there's something that we really want to see? The answer to the first part is the ISS orbit track is predicted out roughly 5 days in advance. Actually, no, that's wrong. It's actually put out about 2 weeks in advance, but the further out you get from the model initiation point, the less confidence you have in that prediction. The group, the Crew Earth Observations group, we only predict out 24 hours in advance, because as you get even 48 hours in advance, you start getting error creeping in to that positional location estimate. And every few days, the group at JSC who tracks the station progress collects ground-based data to verify the position of the ISS so they can continually recalibrate their models. But that said, so you can get a pretty good idea of where the ISS is going to be about 2 weeks out in advance. The second part of your question, we don't. We don't alter the trajectory of the ISS. The only time that's done is if there's a danger of orbital debris hitting the space station, what's called a damage avoidance maneuver. Then the ISS the altitude is usually boosted up to get it out of the predicted path of wherever orbital debris is coming in. But no, the ISS is pretty much fairly fixed. We can change the attitude of the ISS somewhat, but we don't wholesale alter the orbital pathway of the ISS. Yes, sir. Okay. The answer to that question is because the State Department has directed that we are not to do work with China. There's a number of political reasons for that, which I can't really go into too much. China is what we call a listed country. It's a country that the U.S. has identified as being involved in activities that we consider not in the common welfare. And so that is the reason that we don't interact directly with China. The reason they have their own space program is because they can. I mean, they're just like India in that regard. As I said earlier when we started off, it's in the nature of humans to explore, and because they have the capability to do so, they are doing so. I hope that's a sufficient answer. Yes, sir.
I live in the Pacific Northwest, and the rumor that we have concerned about something called the cascade abduction zone. And NASA do any seismic research or geological earthquake research?
We do certainly quite a lot of geological research from space, and we have collected data. Topographical data that can be used to look at ground surface deformation. We also we have sensors which look at the geophysical parameters of the Earth's surface. We don't have sensors which are specifically designed to investigate subduction zones from space. That is a technology that you need sort of on the ground seismic equipment to do. But I guess the answer to your question is, yeah, we collect data that is used by researchers to support a wide variety of different research into the Cascadia subduction zone, whether it's mineralogical information from the Earth's surface, looking at topographical variations that may be the result of shifts in the Earth's surface, or as it changes in the Earth's geophysical parameters that might be an indication of changes in the mass balance. So yes, the answer to your question is yes. No? Yes, sir. Interesting question. question. Think about that for a second. I think certainly we've learned a lot from the technological aspect. You know, what's worked, what hasn't worked. I think from the human aspect, we have learned. We're learning about the limits of human exposure. We're learning, you know, how long an astronaut can work on a daily cycle, what kind of activities they like to use to keep themselves in a good operating space. And in fact, one of the benefits of the handheld astronaut photography, which is not immediately apparent, is it's proven to be the word that's bandied about is salutary activity for the crew. Simply looking out the window and taking pictures of the Earth as it goes by is reported by virtually every astronaut that comes back to be one of their favorite activities and one of the ones that keeps them the most centered during their day. And this is something that, you know, people are considering when we talk about a year-long voyage to Mars, because the crew isn't going to be able to look out the window and see the Earth. You know, so we need to develop ways to keep that in mind. You know, the human aspect for that kind of activity. I'd say the other lessons learned are kind of on the destructive end. You know, we have learned what happens when such a large structure falls back into the atmosphere. You know, we observed the Mir re-entry with great interest, and of course collected a lot of information on how such a large structure will break up. So that's feeding into end-of-life studies for the International Space Station, whenever that day should be. I think those are some of the bigger results that we've gotten. Well, the second part, that's a different question. The first part, however, is that's one of the main reasons why we have continuous crew on the ISS. I mean, ever since it's been continuously crewed ever since it's been in orbit from 2000, actually 1999. But so each crew that goes up, we learn more about how that affects humans in long-term space duration. In fact, you know, some of the recent research is now pointing out health issues that we hadn't even known about before. I mean, we were well aware that long-term exposure to space leads to bone density loss. And so we've been able to devise active regimens, you know, exercise regimens to help combat that. We can't cure it, we can't prevent it, but we can slow it down considerably. We've learned a lot about, as I mentioned earlier, how to recycle the organic wastes, which is something we're going to need to do on long-term voyages. We've learned a lot about the psychological aspects of being in space, and that's another aspect of the one-year mission for Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko is, you know, because other astronauts, they go up for sometimes 3 months, 6 months, but this is the first time that anyone has been an extended 1 year, you know, contiguous time exposure to space. As far as the second part of your question, you know, should we send people up? Well, that's more a philosophical question. I think ultimately it comes down to the fact that if we can do it, we will do it. And I think we've seen, you know, just the commercial calls for people who want to go on a one-way trip to Mars. The response to that was amazing. You know, so clearly it's something in human nature, or at least a subset of human nature, that we want to do. We want to do that. We will want to explore regardless of the cost.
So you mentioned end of life. There's something always wondering about. You know, we spend a lot of money putting stuff up there.
Mhm.
With the end of life, it's going to burn out. Yeah. Would it be better to do stuff on higher scale than scavenging?
I agree. I mean, I think, and there are discussions ongoing for, you know, as you know, originally the ISS was originally planned for deorbiting in 2016. Now that's been extended to 2024. There are discussions to extend it to 2028. And it may go beyond that. It all really gets down to, you know, what's the actual physical lifetime of the components themselves. So I would say that story is not closed. at the moment, but it's something that we plan for. We're all about planning for as many contingencies as we can possibly imagine, and some that we can't imagine. So that's part of that activity.
There's a whole bunch in the back, but we're not done yet.
Okay. We do. The question is, what are the capabilities of, I guess I'd recast that, what are the capabilities of NASA to do public outreach for the ISS? And we do, in fact, travel around the country. There's a traveling roadshow, if you want to call it, that actually travels to various, we've been to Seattle before. We were in Seattle 3 years ago. And we've most recently been in Philadelphia, Boston, pretty much all the major cities around the world, where we go for a week, and we have a full display set up. Personnel from the ISS program science office will go and do exactly what you're talking about. We will go to the area schools. We'll go to meet with interested parties. For instance, when the last time we were in Seattle, I met with Coast Guard and NOAA, talking to them about potential collaborative opportunities on the ISS. So we do have that. I mean, our staff is not unlimited, and so we do have some constraints. We can't do that, say, every week, but we do it on I'd say about a 2 to 3 month rotating basis. We'll go to different cities. There are also NASA speaker bureaus, where if you're an organization, you can request speakers from NASA, and if they're from the ISS, typically they come from us, from Johnson Space Center. But there are other centers they can come from as well. They can come from Marshall Space Center in Alabama. They can come from JPL, California, because they have sensors on the ISS as well. So I think those mechanisms do exist. And you can contact the ISS program to find out how to get access to those.
There's still more questions. As long as you are ready to stay here. I mean, eventually some of you are going to start falling asleep. Okay. I see at least 2 more. 1, 2.
Oops.
We'll start counting down.
Wait, I need to prepare myself.
Yeah. Stand up and speak clearly so the rest of us can hear you. Thanks.
So the first section measurement across time.
The question is extending the internet across planets. I'm not terribly deep into those plans. The only ones that I'm really aware of are if indeed we go to Mars. I mean, one of the logical first steps would be to set up some kind of communication infrastructure around that planet. Yeah.
What he's talking about is what he's talking about apparently is space that and the few consortium actually came up with that are looking at one of the ones out of the France. And they're looking at putting up satellites all over the Earth for internet access, for international internet. That's what
Okay.
they're working with NASA.
I don't want to give you misinformation. I really have nothing. I'm not involved in any of that work. It would not surprise me if there is some branch of the engineering areas of NASA that are involved in that to some degree, but I'm not aware of any specific program.
How many? I got 1, 1, 2, 3. Can we hold the 16, please? 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
Sir, you. Hi, stand up so we can hear you.
Yeah, Reginald Gillens, I'm out of Seattle with the Boeing Company, and I really do appreciate this conversation. I'll just try to go quickly on this bullet item. South Carolina flooding, was there any visibility between the ISSA on that? Can you elaborate on that? I know there's a lot of great sensing devices on ISS. How good are your sensors? I mean, everybody loves Google Earth, right? Okay, so do you have something like better than that? It's kind of like gold and these subterranean views that we get in fine things like, I don't know, maybe gold. And then what is the bandwidth that you have in terms of maximum capacity? How fast can you communicate? And what are some of the security concerns that you have? You know, what are you on K-band or are you on S-band? I mean, you know, if you can kind of elaborate on that, I'd really appreciate that. If you do a little shout out for Robonaut too, I don't know if that's still on board.
It is. And we're still working on that. Okay. Try to answer it. Maybe I'll answer your questions in reverse order. The primary downlink for data from the ISS is done in the KU band, and the bandwidth currently is about 100 megabits per second, but we're working on increasing that to 600 megabits per second. That'll take place over the next couple of years. The question about well, let me talk about the kind of sensors that we can put on the ISS. Remote sensing, in terms of optical remote sensing, which is sort of like Landsat, there you're only looking at the uppermost surface of the Earth. You can't really image subterranean structures from orbit. For that, you need a ground-based system. There is a case if you're using a radar system, and the ground conditions are ideal. You can penetrate 15, 20 meters below the surface with a radar system from orbit. And this was done, I believe, in Egypt to discover some buried trade routes that had been buried by the sand. The fact that the sand had the right dielectric constant to enable the radar to penetrate, it was able to reflect off the much more densely packed trade route sediments underneath, and that's why they were visible in that data set. But generally from the ISS, you're looking at surface materials, so no real depth. On the ground surface, the HICO, the hyperspectral imager for the coastal ocean that I mentioned, that sensor, as its name suggests, was specifically aimed at looking at coastal processes. And there were bands in that which people had used to actually get some bathymetric data in shallow areas. So that you can do as well if you have the right wavelengths. I'm sorry, I forget what your first bullet was. South Carolina. Yes, we call that area out as a dynamic event to the crew, so it's certainly aware of collecting data for it. That, oddly enough, did not become a disaster charter activation, because typically the disaster charter is activated by developing countries. The U.S. doesn't typically activate the IDC because we have assets ourselves that we can collect that data for. So yes, there has been a lot of data, remotely sensed data collected for that event, specifically used for mapping out areas of flooding. Well, I'm not actively involved with Robonaut, but I know we're still checking it out. We're still working it. We're loading up the software. We're getting ready to use it, and we actually have done some things with it already. But I don't believe it's fully operational yet. But still up there, definitely.
There was 1 and 2 and that penultimate question.
At the moment, I don't believe that there's any specific work being done on that, other than maintaining the solar panels themselves on the ISS. I don't believe there's any specific engineering work being done on new solar panel systems, but that's certainly an area that could be explored through CASIS, through the Center for Advancement of Science and Space. They support exactly that kind of research. So that's an avenue. If that's an interest of yours, that's what I would suggest you contact.
Last one.
Regarding engineering reason why we don't have rotating space stations like in 2008.
You know, it's funny. I have exactly the same question, and I wonder why we don't. There have been several proposals put forth to construct sort of a centrifugal gravity system, but for some reason, yeah, they've just never materialized, and I don't know if that's because there's some material constraint that's involved, perhaps in the necessary lubricants involved to keep the wheel turning, or some other factor. Unfortunately, I can't give you a better answer than that, but I certainly understand your question, and I have the same one.
Well done, sir.
Oh, thank you.
I want to make final shout-outs. First, Dr. Sherry Wen, who recruited these speakers. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Nancy. And I want to give a shout-out to NASA. For several consecutive years, has provided very important support for this conference. Yes. And I hope all of you sleep well so you can remember some of these things that you heard today, because we're all kind of drinking out of a fire hose here. So some of it sits and you remember it for tomorrow. Thank you, everyone.